Good afternoon. My name is Leo Daughtry, and I live in Smithfield, North Carolina, and I am an at-large member of NCDOT Board of Governors, being Board of Transportation. I'm new on the board, and I wondered why they would choose me for this role today, and it dawned on me that you don't have to be very smart to understand that multimodal transportation is the most important thing for our future. How we can have innovative new technologies and use in various forms of transportation today and in the very near future. Also, I think one of the reasons they asked me to chair this panel is because of Julie White. She's very smart, and she will, anything I do wrong, she will correct. And at this point, I want to introduce to you Julie White, the Assistant DOT for Multimodal.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to have Board Member Daughtry introduce me. I worked with the representative when I worked at the General Assembly some 20 years ago. So y'all don't know, but he was telling me I haven't aged a day. So that puts him at the top of my list. So we are really excited to have a great panel for y'all today as we think about innovations in multimodal transportation. I am so excited to personally put this panel together and thought about who we most wanted y'all to hear from that are doing some really exciting things in both the public and private sectors. So you are in for a treat with the panel we put together. So I'm going to introduce each person individually. They will speak with some opening remarks for you. And then we'll get to the more exciting part, the Q&A part of the session. So you can be thinking about the questions you would like to ask after they get through with their opening remarks. We'll have an opportunity for you to stand up and ask your question. I know you're going to bring great questions for this team that we've brought forward to you. And we're going to do one of our poll questions as we've been doing throughout the day. So at any time, you'll be able to look down. I know it's already up on the app and answer our poll questions so that I can share with you the results of that before the end. So first up today, we have Jennifer Mitchell, the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration. Jennifer is a 25-year transportation veteran in both the public and private sectors. And she is a graduate of our own UNC Chapel Hill. Go Heels. She is, you won't get claps here. This is a Wolfpack crowd, so sorry. All right, there's a few. She is incredibly experienced in negotiating landmark deals for improvements in Virginia's rail system and serves on many national transportation boards and organizations such as the American Public Transportation Association. As with all of our panelists, you can find their full bios. These folks are so well seasoned and experienced. Don't miss reading their full bio. But please welcome me and join me in welcoming Jennifer Mitchell.
Thank you, Julie. It is really great to be here. I had the opportunity to work a lot with Julie and a number of the NCDOT staff that are here. And my prior position as director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Also, we had an annual transportation conference like this, so I know this is a great opportunity for you all to see your colleagues and learn a lot from each other too. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you again, Julie, for the invitation. I know we are here to talk about innovation, and I will talk about what FRA is doing in innovation, but I really can't get by without talking first about the bipartisan infrastructure law and the funding that we have, new unprecedented levels of funding for rail across the country. So in year one of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we made more than $16 billion in rail funding available across the country. We used funding that we already had to advance more than 70 rail projects. We awarded funds for projects like preliminary engineering of the Raleigh to Richmond passenger rail corridor, projects that are essential to the movement of people and goods, and projects that fuel innovation like the Climate Change and Extreme Events Training and Research Program at San Jose State University. The investments we made last year lay the foundation for future growth. Over the next 4 years, we aim to invest strategically to expand and modernize the Northeast Corridor, bring world-class passenger rail service to other regions across the nation, to grow a safer, cleaner, and more equitable rail system. Regarding the Northeast Corridor, we have over $9 billion in funding available right now. This notice of funding of opportunity is open until March 27th. We also just released our Northeast Corridor project inventory back in November too, which lays out the plan for all of our investments in the Northeast Corridor. Nationwide, we took steps to expand passenger and to improve rail in communities across the country. We obligated an unprecedented $4.3 billion to Amtrak for rail nationwide. We launched a first of its kind program, our Corridor Identification and Development Program. We made nearly $2.3 billion available, which is available now to fund expansion of passenger rail service across the country and in states like North Carolina. This notice of funding opportunity is open until March 7th. We are also working on a long-distance Amtrak service study to look at the potential and possible restoration and expansion of long-distance services. We expect that to be done by November of next year. But really, safety is at the core of FRA's mission. A big part of that is also grade crossing safety. Last year alone, we had over 2,000 incidents across the country, resulting in over 240 deaths as well, which is just far too much. In June, we made available more than $573 million through a new railroad crossing elimination program to make communities safer, reduce wait times at crossings, and increase the mobility of people and goods. Other examples where we are currently supporting and advancing safety research across the country. Last week, we hosted a demo of our rail crossing violation warning equipped vehicle over at the U.S. Department of Transportation. This is a system that works through communicating the status of grade crossing infrastructure to equipped approaching vehicles to help limit driver error and prevent collisions. Really exciting example of technology where we hope we will be able to see this instituted in vehicles and automobiles in the future as well. We also have an example of satellite radar imagery for ground hazard risk monitoring in railway track and slopes. This is an effort we're working on with partners L3Harris Geospatial and CSX to detect early signs of potential ground hazards in railway right-of-way and quantifying and monitoring soil content changes. We also have artificial intelligence-aided machine vision for grade crossing safety. This is an effort we're working on with project partner Ytronics LLC to use video from forward-facing cameras installed in locomotives to inspect highway rail grade crossings to ensure compliance with safety regulations. We are also investing in new innovative technologies, funding workforce development efforts. We know is a huge issue in both the private and public sectors of our industry right now with all the work we're doing, and partnering with universities. Some of the work we're doing on new and innovative technologies, we're funding the replacement and rehabilitation of outdated, higher emission locomotives and equipment and replacing those with new, efficient, and climate-friendly technology, such as low and no emission locomotives. Just last month, I was down here and to visit with NCDOT, but then also to go to Chester, South Carolina, where we saw the results of one of our grants from several years ago to fund 3 rebuilt near zero emission locomotives on the Lancaster and Chester Railroad. We're also working now with the San Bernardino Transportation Authority on the operation of new hydrogen fuel cell powered multi-unit passenger trains. Some of the workforce development efforts we have, mechanical craft workforce development, apprentice training programs, where we're working on providing professional development opportunities for Amtrak employees and helping to retain and retrain employees with valuable work experience. We also are partnering with universities such as Rutgers, New Jersey State to develop an artificial intelligence monitoring system for railroad trespassing mitigation. So in short, we're increasing capacity internally. We're also supporting efforts of our Transportation Technology Center and strengthening public-private partnerships to foster innovation. Just this year, we've established a new Office of Railroad Development, Railroad Data and Innovation. We also have a new contract with ENSCO Incorporated at Transportation Technology Center. That's our facility, a 52-acre facility we have out in Pueblo, Colorado. Some of the future research we'll be doing out there includes human factors research, grade crossing testing, testing and training with other agencies such as the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Agency, FTA, and Transportation Security Administration. We aim to strengthen and grow other public-private partnerships as well to foster innovation. One example is RailPlus. This is something that's actually being led by Norfolk Southern, also in partnership with GATX, Genesee and Wyoming, Trinity Rail, and Watco. It's a new technology platform that will help facilitate and accelerate the adoption of GPS technologies and other telematics across the North American railcar fleet. Big picture, we're growing a safer, cleaner, and more equitable rail system. We will continue to move with urgency to meet the moment and accelerate innovation. When we're not slowing down in year 2 of the bipartisan infrastructure law. 2023 will have more project selections through our Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, our CRISI grant program, and our federal state partnership program. We'll make billions in more funding available for FRA's grant programs and to Amtrak, and we will continue to support and advance research to foster innovation. So again, thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to hearing questions later. Thank you.
Well, I can't remember how many millions and billions she just said that they've made available at the FRA, but it's a good time to be in rail. So next we have Joe Moy, who is the CEO of Beep Incorporated, an autonomous mobility solution company. Joe is a business executive and entrepreneur with 35 years of experience and has been a champion for transparency and autonomous vehicle testing with leaders in transportation to allow us to better utilize this technology. If you haven't had a chance, be sure and go down to the exhibition hall where the partnership that we have with Beep is featured. We have a Beep shuttle that you can go and take a look at that Joe will probably talk to you more about. Come on up, Joe.
It strikes me that with all these connections to North Carolina, my family and I did live in Charlotte at one point in our lives. So there is a connection there. I'm a big ACC fan, just of the wrong flavor for this room. So we'll leave it at that. But really a great pleasure to be here. My team took my slides away because I had like 60 of them and they said I only had 10 minutes. So I decided to just speak from the heart here. But first, let me say what a great pleasure to be here. It's really interesting. I had a chance to talk to Secretary Boyette a few minutes ago and shared with him that I just came down from Washington where I spoke at an SAE International Conference. And there were fewer people there than there are in this event here, which says a lot about North Carolina's commitment to transforming mobility in all modes. The whole concept of this multimodal solutioning at all levels is so critical to advancing accessibility and advancing different forms of transportation that are needed to really connect the goods and services and people and places across our country. The bad news about notes is when you don't have your reading glasses, they serve no purpose whatsoever. So I'm going to wing this and we'll hopefully have some great inspiring questions that remind me of the things I forget. But back to the work going on here in North Carolina and our partnership with the state as it relates to the deployment of these platforms, these autonomous, connected, electric shared mobility solutions. Julie gave you a little bit of a background on Beep. We are a mobility as a services supplier that has been deployed now across 6 states and 25 plus public road deployments, where we actually take autonomous vehicles in these shared form factors, these shuttles, electric platforms that are operating in high levels of true autonomy, driverless platforms, to really prove out the technology in these first mile, last mile type use cases. And I think that's important to understand. You've probably read about autonomous technology for many years. I think at some point in time in 2023, we were going to have cars all over our roadways with no drivers and, zipping around like the Jetsons. The reality is that technology is advancing materially and substantially, every week, every month, every year. But I would argue that the technology is going to be proven out in these mobility use cases where you have a more controlled speed, geofence type use cases. And we'll talk about that more, but where, it's a little bit of a walk before you run type challenge that we have. Although the technology, both camera and sensor technologies, are getting more and more perceptive, more and more able to act like a human would when faced with various circumstances on our roadways, the reality of it is it still has a long way to go. And the artificial intelligence component of that in particular. We're very excited as a business over the last 4.5 years to be driving a lot of this advancement in technology and have announced some next generation platforms that'll be operating in true level 4 attendantless capacities in the next 2 years on our roadways across the U.S. Today, everything that we do is governed by NHTSA and US DOT for the right reasons. We've got to kind of prove out the safety and capabilities of these vehicles in these different scenarios, I think, to ultimately drive the level of adoption that's going to be necessary to, truly proliferate these types of solutions out in these urban communities, campus environments, and various scenarios where this first mile, last mile delivery is so key. Public transportation statistic for you. People are 90% less likely to use transportation if they have to walk a half a mile to access that transportation. That really reinforces, I think, one of the most underserved challenges that we've got in mobility in our country, which is how do you connect people so that they can gain access to other resources, other mobility options in these underserved communities, in these downtown urban areas, in these service centers that people want to get to. And that's a big piece of what we are solving for as a business. A couple of things I would share with you on the regulatory front, those of you that study that. Our country has a long way to go. Candidly, I think we're falling behind Europe and we're falling behind China in particular as it relates to being able to advance the testing and deployment of these types of solutions. And I only say that because, one of the challenges that we've collectively got is at a state level or at a local level, we can't just throw any vehicle on the roadway. We've got to go through the process of adhering to our federal motor vehicle safety standards that the DOT and NHTSA put out. 40-year-old standards that don't take into account technology and autonomy. So you can't just take an autonomous vehicle that's purpose-built without a driver's cockpit and throw it on the roadway. One of the things that we're working on that I think is going to be so critical to the success of autonomy in general is how do we get our federal government to catch up with some of the momentum that's going on in areas like the state here. I think that the CASI program, if you're not familiar with it, you should drop by the booth and learn a little bit more about it. But the state here is really taking a leadership role. I think there's about a half a dozen states that I would count, North Carolina at the top of that list, of course, that are really the ones that are pioneering and testing these types of use cases, driving the community engagement, the education that's going to be so critical to our success. So can't say enough about the great work that's been done here to date. We're excited to be partnering on this next phase of testing and deploying these platforms across a number of pilots in the state and look forward to spending a little time together today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we have Prem Gurejan. Okay, all right. Prem is the co-founder and CEO of RideCo, an industry-leading on-demand transit technology platform that powers transit services for some of North America's largest transit agencies. In addition to being founder and chairman of the board at Tangent Systems, Prem is a creative problem solver and co-inventor on multiple awarded and pending patents in the fields of urban transportation systems, computer vision, and operations research. Please give a warm welcome to Prem.
Thank you, Julie, for that wonderful introduction and for the opportunity. I do have a few slides that I'd like to share with everyone here. All right, it worked. First off, it's a great pleasure to share the stage with my co-panelists. I'll speak a few words today about specifically microtransit, how it relates to multimodal transportation, and the impact it's having in small urban and rural communities that we're seeing across the nation. A little bit about RideCo. As Julie mentioned, we're a microtransit technology and solutions provider. We work with a lot of agencies. We have over 60 services across the nation, and definitely a lot of large agencies, LA Metro, San Antonio, Houston, RTC Southern Nevada. We actually have our first implementation here in North Carolina. So thank you for the opportunity, LJ, and excited to work with your team to get it, make it a big success. So yeah, we're rolling out Concord, Kannapolis as we speak. So very excited for that partnership. So what is on-demand transit? You've all seen different flavors of this: demand response, transit, paratransit solutions. And there are few characteristics that make on-demand transit modern and suitable for the next generation of moving people. Number one, technology-enabled apps. So a rider, without the need for manual intervention, the dispatcher can book their own ride. They can check the status of their own ride. They can cancel it, change it. So they're fully self-sufficient. So that's number one. On the back end, the system has to be heavily automated. So continuous schedule optimization. The system is reactive to real-world conditions. So if a vehicle falls behind schedule, it can re-optimize schedules and keep things going on track and to ensure on-time performance. And so it's automated quite a bit from the back end, and it's very self-sufficient and frees the user on the front end. So this paradigm is having impact across communities everywhere. We've actually started seeing exponential growth in the past few years, where every agency, I would say almost every agency that we're speaking with, there is implementing a trial or has a full-fledged permanent service or is looking to implement one. So before I get into the weeds, I want to talk a bit about the big picture. What gets me excited about the space and gets me up in the morning and excited to solve these problems. There's two aspects to it. First is communities that deploy on-demand transit really open up opportunity for their residents. I think Joe had spoken about walking, right? How that really limits mobility. And when you can really solve that problem and open up the catchment area for riders, they have access to more opportunity, more restaurants, more colleges, more hospitals, more entertainment, and vice versa. The venues, the businesses, the establishment, they have access to a much bigger addressable market of people that can come and patronize their businesses and their services. So it really opens up the connectivity within a community. So that's the big picture. On a more micro level, and we see this day in and day out, it actually deeply impacts the personal lives of the riders that can use the service. And it gives them back time. One of the common challenges of transit is a lot of walking, waiting, multiple transfers. And when you can take someone's commute that may have been, say, 2 hours before with a lot of walking, waiting, and transfers, and when you can shrink that down to 45 minutes with a lot less waiting, maybe one transfer, maybe no transfer, and get them to where they want to go, you change their lives, right? And it affects them every day. And you're giving back a lot of time in their lives, and it accumulates over time. So I see this, and my team sees this every day, both the big picture impact and the small impact in people's lives. And that's very exciting about on-demand transit. So as it relates to small urban and rural communities, we have many implementations across the nation. There are three characteristics that we see that are critical for success in these types of implementations for on-demand transit. And I'll speak about the three. They're time snapping, frequency variation, and commingling. So what do they mean? So time snapping relates to how on-demand transit integrates with fixed route. In multimodal transportation, it's important for them all to play, all the different modes to play well with each other. So riders can seamlessly take on demand, get onto fixed route, get onto rail, And that connectivity, that glue, is very important to ensure good end-to-end user experience. And so time snapping is a capability that we're seeing deployed across a lot of these services. And what it means is when a rider uses the app to request a ride, either their departure time or their arrival time is actually snapped to the schedule of, it could be a fixed route bus, it could be even even a venue. So we've seen implementations where when I'm requesting a ride to a certain transit station, my drop-off times is actually aligned with the bus schedule. So if, let's say, the bus is leaving at 9:30, my drop-off time automatically snaps to 9:25. So my arrival is timely and I can make my connection. So doing that in an automated fashion consistently is important for a reliable user experience. And we found that to be quite essential to adoption and customer success. Another use case for that we're seeing is connecting people to work. So one of our implementations in San Antonio, there's a Toyota plant, and they have shift work on a certain schedule. It's an irregular schedule, but the drop-off times and the pickup times need to match the schedule that the place wants. So there's a partnership with the employer, with the transit agency, where they can align that schedule using on-demand. So that's time snapping. The other thing is frequency variation. You know, everybody here has probably used a Lyft or an Uber or something like that, where you press a button and you get connected to a vehicle or driver right away. And that's very convenient. Transit operates differently. Right? On transit, you're used to setting a schedule. You may have limited vehicles or resources. And you're used to things like a service frequency schedule, right? This area I can service at a 1 hourly frequency or a half hourly frequency. It can vary based on time of day. In on-demand transit, having that kind of capability is also important. So we've deployed services where there's a frequency variation set based on the use case. So to give you an example, if you're in Raleigh, right, if you're connecting into Durham, the transit operator may want to set a half-hourly frequency. So when you request a ride, you're not immediately connected to a driver. You have kind of a pickup frequency of every half hour, roughly. It helps with pooling efficiency, getting more passengers in the vehicle and having good utilization. On the flip side, if you have someone coming from rural Wake County into Raleigh, you may have a 1 hourly frequency, right? 1 hourly, maybe half hourly during peak times, 1 hourly off peak times. So you can mix and match these different frequencies. And that's really been critical to making on-demand transit successful in rural and inter-community transit. So the last part is commingling. A lot of you may have heard about commingling. I'd love to share a success story with you in the coming slides. The commingling basically means you have different services and you have different fleets. So you may have a paratransit service and a separate fleet for that service. And you may have a conventional transit fleet for that type of service. Often especially in smaller cities, the utilization of these vehicles is irregular. So the paratransit fleet may see its peak utilization at, say, 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. And the conventional transit fleet may see its utilization peak at 8 a.m. It can vary based on seasonality or agency. And so by commingling, so using a shared fleet, but servicing both sets of riders with different business rules or service rules, you have better fleet utilization, and there's a larger fleet serving the rider, so there's more availability. So a paratransit rider can get more ride options, less wait time when they request a ride because there's a bigger fleet there to service them. And they might be able to share a ride with a conventional rider going in a similar direction. And so doing this in a seamless way is what technology does. That's what the new generation of on-demand technology does. And it's producing some fantastic results in communities everywhere. So I'd like to end with two case studies, one that's a small rural community and one that's a large urban, to show how these innovations are delivering impact. So Coburg is a very small city, 19,000, a population of 19,000. And prior to the modern on-demand transit system, they had a separate fixed route system. They had two buses running on an irregular schedule, maybe once every, I think there were about a 1 hourly frequency bus routes. They were running along the main roads of the town. And then they had a separate paratransit fleet servicing that population. They eventually commingled it And what's happened is the wait times have gone down across the board for both sets of riders. For the bus riders from 1 hourly to now it's under 20 minutes. They've added a lot of flex stops all across the community. So it's no longer just the roads on the arterial pathways. So riders walk less. They can get service just down the street corner or nearby bus stop. On the paratransit side, riders have more availability because there's a bigger fleet there to service them. And ultimately, they were able to service more riders with same fleet, but less revenue hours. So they actually save money in terms of cost per passenger. They had a 7% reduction in cost per passenger, but more rides and also better service quality to their riders. In transit, transit planners are often used to analyzing the trade-offs between service and cost, right? You give more service, it's more cost. But the nice thing with innovations like microtransit and commingling is you can get both. You can get better service quality at lower cost. It's a win-win on both sides. So those are some metrics from Coburg. And the last one I'll end on is a large urban, San Antonio. They launched microtransit, just a bit over 2 years ago in one zone. It was a small, it's I would say the mid-sized zone, 19 square miles, 80,000 population on the outskirts of San Antonio. It's a suburban, residential type area. They had 2 fixed route buses running at about 1.5 hour, one at 45-minute frequency. Underutilized, small catchment area. They replaced those with about 8 on-demand transit vans, put flex stops or virtual stops all across the community, and the access to transit dramatically went up. Now riders all across the community could get transit within 15-minute wait time, short walk. So the adoption, went through the roof. The cost was lower because they have smaller format vehicles. They don't have these mostly empty buses driving around in these loops. So the cost per ride went down by over 35%. So they were so encouraged by the success of the service that they now have 4 zones operating and 2 more zones launching later this year. All similar type of use case, whether it's low density to medium density, where fixed route did not work well. And they deployed microtransit, integrating microtransit into the fixed route network that connects people into the core of San Antonio. A few really neat KPIs. They're hitting 5 passengers per vehicle hour, really great productivity, a lot of shared rides, and significant usage. Thank you.
So if y'all have ever checked out the Wilson partnership that we helped facilitate with the company VIA, which was one that Prem was talking about, we helped the town of Wilson stand down their fixed route and stand up a microtransit product that's seen similar huge successes. And microtransit is really exploding not only across our state, but across the country. So a very exciting product. So next we have Danielle Spila. Danielle is with the Pennsylvania DOT Bureau of Public Transportation. She has worked in various positions at PennDOT since 1998. She has served as the director of the Bureau of Public Transportation since 2015, where she is responsible for over $1.5 billion in annual federal and state investments in public transportation, and that support over 400 million trips annually. PennDOT has oversight for 35 fixed route systems and 43 shared ride systems that provide subsidized demand response service. Well, come on up, Daniel.
So the first hurdle, getting out of my chair and safely getting up here, was accomplished. The second is, can I advance the slides? I'm really pleased to be here. Pennsylvania, obviously, lots of transportation, very similar to North Carolina. I've never been to a conference in 20 years where there were this many people from all the industries in Pennsylvania together. We do little siloed conferences. So I have a public transportation conference that I usually present at. So how many of you are public transit affiliated agencies or? Okay, so good. I feel like I'm talking to my people now. So PennDOT, like I said, large agency, 40,000 miles of state-owned roadway, lots of snow. I was talking to someone earlier, pothole season has erupted in Pennsylvania, even though we haven't gotten much snow this year. We have an $11.5 billion budget. Transit is about 15% of that budget, which is pretty big when you think about I think we're the 5th largest state supported transit system. So, we get a lot of state money. And then I'm in a multimodal deputate, much like Julie. My boss is overcharged of everything. And when they created that deputate, originally it was going to be the non-highway deputate. I'm like, I am not going to be in a non-highway, non-something deputate. So they renamed it to the multimodal deputate, which is great. So we have aviation, we have public transportation, we have rail, ports, and freights, and we have bicycle and pedestrians that we're kind of responsible within my deputate. So in public transportation, specifically in Pennsylvania, I think the big thing that I wanted to share with you, and I'll talk a little bit about, is it's kind of like, I feel like we've been doing microtransit in Pennsylvania for 40 years. It's a different flavor. We didn't have the technology, but we kind of coordinated the service, like what Prem was talking about relative to commingling. We've been doing that for years and years. So Pennsylvania in the 1980s created an on-demand paratransit system for senior citizens. And we subsidized those trips for those seniors at 85% using our state lottery dollars. And it's in every single county in Pennsylvania. So all of the citizens have access to that transportation. You do not have to have a subsidy in order to use it. However, it's unaffordable if you don't, because the trips run between $25 and $50 or $75. Nobody can afford that. However, having that network allowed us to kind of build on that. And so our NEMT, non-emergency medical transportation, uses that system. We created a statewide program for people with disabilities. They use that system. So that network has become our on-demand transportation. And then we've kind of launched from there. So like I said, we have $1.5 billion in state dollars that we invest in public transportation in Pennsylvania. About $1.25 billion of that this year was for operating. SEPTA gets $750 million. Port Authority gets $250 million. So there's $1 billion out the door, right? But still, we have all of those other systems, and some of them are in really small communities that get operating dollars to the tune of $250 million, which is a lot of money within those systems. So they rely on our state dollars. I wanted to show you our ridership's coming back. Slow, but it's coming back. So that was just a. So what are we doing relative to innovation in Pennsylvania? And I feel like we're like, there's two things that go through my mind when we're talking about innovation. We're public agencies. We're funded with taxpayer dollars. We do safe innovation because we don't want to risk the dollars that we're allowed to spend on behalf of the public. But at the same time, we do want to innovate and make things better for our riding public. So Pennsylvania has done some technology investments. We've done a lot of capital investments, and I'll kind of give you my spin on why I think that's innovative. And then we have focused a lot of effort over the last 10 years on coordination and collaboration. So I talked about our shared ride system. And one of the things, we were fortunate enough to get a federal grant many years ago, and that over the course of about 8 to 10 years, we have developed that into a Find My Ride system. So we're kind of doing a little bit of what Prem's company is doing, but we're not quite doing the same things. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to use that technology and create that system across the state. So it's not just in one transit system, but it's across the state that you can access that transportation and you can know what it is. So as part of that, we have an education component, and you all can go and look and see what we've done on this. It's available on our website. But we launched that in February 2022, and it seems like a small thing, but it's been fantastic for our partners to be able to go. We will say to them, go to our website. Literally, it's videos on how to ride public transportation, how to ride the shared ride system. Who are the contacts that you need to know in your local community in order to access those services? Something so simple, but yet it's all in one place. And so we're really happy with that and kind of how that works. And then along with that, we have a Find My Ride Apply. So I talked about, in Pennsylvania, we called our NEMT the Non-Emergency Medical Transportation, MATP, Medical Assistance Transportation. So we have developed an online application for all of those subsidized programs that we run. So people that are seniors, they get free transit on fixed route. They get subsidized transit on demand. People with disabilities get different programs. And so we've created an online application that you can go and answer questions, and it will just automatically send your information to the transit agency, who can then process your applications. And this has, I think, on here it has some numbers. So we launched it about a year ago, and we have, I think, 12,000 Pennsylvanians that have accessed and been able to receive service because of this application. And the cool thing about it, the transit agencies love it, because if they get a call, they can fill out the application on the phone, and then they don't have to send something out to someone. And it's hooked into our driver licensing center, or a driver licensing system, so that people who are 65, it automatically verifies them with their driver license number. So it's been a really cool thing that we've launched. And then we're working on the scheduling piece, right? So that we can get those on-demand rides that you can just automatically go online and book your trip, and then that kind of all happens behind the way. So we've got that deployed in a couple of counties, but we're really focusing on launching that next. In coordination with that, we've looked at the fixed route system, and we've done a lot of the ITS around the fixed route system. So we have systems in Pennsylvania that have 3 or 4 buses. And then I'm not going to include SEPTA Port Authority, because we always talk about everyone except them. I have other systems that have 100 or 150 buses. So big diversity. They all will have this fixed route ITS technology, which allows us to get consistent data collection, passenger counts. They'll all have the CAT AVL. A lot of them are choosing to go with the video cameras on there. And the whole idea is that we purchase this as a state, and we're helping them to implement it so that we can get standardization across the state. And then Septum Port Authority get about $450 million a year in state funds to invest in their system. And then we have another 80 or so million that we invest for transit agencies. And you can see some of the facility projects that we have. So we have facilities being built all across the state. And the idea for that is that if we build them a better facility, they will hopefully save money, although some of them are like a little shocked when they get their electric bill for the big bus storage facilities that we've been building. But the other idea is that we're putting all of our buses undercover so that they're not out in the weather. And we are improving the facility designs. We're designing the facilities so that they're prepared for the future. So if we go electric, we'll have the ability to do the electric. The roofs are being designed in such a way that we potentially could put solar panels on the tops. And they're really focused on operational savings for the transit agencies as much as we can. And then Pennsylvania has also done a P3 on CNG, so that we have most of our transit agencies are using CNG right now. But I think we're probably going to see kind of a multi-fuel situation in Pennsylvania pretty soon, because the CNG is great. We're a natural gas state. It's right there. But I think in some cases, we probably will start to explore a little bit on the electric side, but we just haven't done that yet. And then, so I talked about that shared ride system. So the way we have funded it for 40 years is you transit agency, you provide a trip, we pay you a subsidy for that trip. So COVID, when they weren't providing trips, guess what? They were losing lots and lots and lots of money. And so we ended up having to use a lot of our federal money and some of our state money to kind of help them out. That had been happening before then, but COVID obviously exacerbated it. And so right now we are in the process of doing a shared ride sustainability study. And the cool thing about this is I talked about collaboration and coordination. We have all of our sister agencies on board participating. So My DHS folks are participating. My labor and industry folks, like relative to the workforce development pieces, we're interviewing them and they're committed. My ideal is that at the end of this study, we're going to have a modern shared ride system that is funded differently so that we can sustain that into the future. And that's my ideal goal. Ideally, in a great world, folks that are transit dependent, that are low income, would also be able to access that service in their small communities. So, like I said, we're developing the background report right now, and we're doing some preliminary models, and then we have to get the state law changed in order for this to go forward. So fingers crossed, we'll come up with something that people will really want to sink their teeth into, because it's been 40 years since we've looked at this kind of on a holistic thing. And we've built things on top of this network that if we tear it apart, we'll never get it back together. And so that's kind of what we're doing relative to innovation on the collaboration side. And then, I don't know, your NEMT program probably has a mileage reimbursement component, so that folks that need to go to those medical appointments that qualify, they can get reimbursed for their mileage. We're working with our DHS counterparts to develop an online ability to do that. So that's kind of an interesting project, because it's really forcing them to look at the way they do things a little bit differently. And it's taken us years, but we're really excited about that partnership with them, and kind of what that's meant for us. So I think that's really all I had right now. So thank you. And I'll just say one of the things that that recently I've been really thinking about is like the pace of change, right? And so there's a woman named Heather McGowan. I don't know if anyone has ever read her book, but it's this book called The Adaptation Advantage. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's really, really good. But in there, she talks about today is the slowest pace of change you're ever going to experience in the rest of your life. And so when you really think about that, like, it's going so fast and we have to be prepared. And we have lots of challenges that we're dealing with, but it's just kind of something to ponder.
Thank you, Danielle. It's funny what you opened with about the non-highway modes. When I got this job, I told my kids I was in charge of everything that wasn't highways. And they said, should you really describe your job as what you don't do? So I appreciate that shared background. So I want to direct you to the app for the poll question. So if you bring up your CVent app, hopefully you've been doing this all day, and click on the Transportation Summit, you will see our session and our poll question, which is, what do you think will be the biggest multimodal change with the greatest benefit our state will see in the near future? And we've given you the options of A, the introduction of air taxis. Pause. If you haven't gone downstairs to see the air taxi, make sure you make a trip. B, expansion of passenger rail. C, expansion of microtransit. And D, introduction of autonomous shared mobility. So I see some people are already answering. I'm not going to say yet what those answers are, but go ahead and get in there and make your answer, and then we'll come back to it and share with you what we heard from the audience and give our panelists a moment to be able to comment on it. And while you're doing that, I want to kick off our Q&A with a couple of cues myself, and then we'll take some from the audience. But Danielle, I was struck by how much our states have in common. You don't have ferries, and I do. But other than that, we have a lot in common. Yeah. Well, and you have a large geography of a state with a lot of rural spaces as well, much like we do. And so I'm wondering how your DOT has worked with your mid-size and small-size communities to grow transit, particularly in your rural communities.
Yeah, so we haven't really grown anything relative to a new community has access to transit, because it's really been the ones that have had access all along. But I think it's something we struggle with. Obviously, that shared ride system helps for those that are able to qualify for subsidies. But I am constantly being asked, could you please do something, because I have this, I need this employee to get somewhere. Like, they don't have a way to get to work. And, I think one of the things, like we have some transit systems, and it's easier in a rural, in an urban area, right? They will work with companies and say, listen, can you adjust your schedules? Can you make them not be, can you work within that industrial complex to, work to get everybody on the same schedule so it makes sense for us to provide that public transportation? Can you contribute? I don't think it's a one size fits all, which makes it really hard to do at a statewide level because our transit agencies, they don't get a lot of local funds. Most of it is state and federal funds. So I wish I had an answer. And I feel like a lot of the stuff we're not the expert on anything, right? We know a little bit about a lot. And it makes it hard because you're constantly trying to figure out, is this going to work? So we've tried new things, but I think there's not one kind of one size fits all.
As you say it, I was thinking about it. You sort of highlighted the whole workforce movement of the workforce. And at the earlier panel on economic development, we heard from all of the panelists that workforce is a huge issue for them. And thinking about, I think it was the VinFast CEO had said, they know they're all competing with one another for the same workforce because they're largely in the same region of our state. And it's a pretty rural region. So they're all thinking about how do we move a workforce to where these jobs are. And so like synchronizing schedules and such, that's really interesting.
And I wanted to ask them if I, was daring enough, what are you contributing from a funding perspective to getting your folks? Like, is that an added benefit? Because I know in some communities, I think there's a place in Pennsylvania where the company is actually paying for the transit service so that their folks can get to work. It's an added benefit. I think it's actually Philadelphia because SEPTA has a fair thing that they're doing like with the hospital system. And they basically are just selling fares, like the number of employees times the number of fare cards. And then everybody has a fare card. And for SEPTA, it's been fantastic because they get that revenue up front and not all the employees are using it. And so, I think that's just them having to be creative.
Mm-hmm. Well, Prem, I was thinking about your the micromobility solution is a last mile solution. We run an intercity train program between Charlotte and Raleigh. You're standing up a new effort in Concord. Talk to us about how those how do we solve last mile solutions? And maybe Concord is an example.
Sure. So normally when we deploy a microtransit service, we engage with our partners to perform some service design. So the first step is understanding the use case, the ridership, the type of riders, what's important to them. So the example that you mentioned with rail, right? You're doing intercity rail, and intercity rail may not be able to operate the way rail within the city can work. You have a frequency, right? You have a schedule. Peak times, maybe there's an irregular schedule. There's a train that departs at 9:05 and then at 9:25 and 9:50. Off peak, it's different. So the first step is understanding how the schedules work, what kind of demand you're expecting, and what resources you have available, and then applying the whole service planning lens that fixed route transit planners use to design a connectivity plan. So I spoke about time snapping as one of the aspects of on-demand transit. So in that scenario where you're planning out connectivity to intercity rail, you can say, okay, I'm going to have 4 vehicles to transport 50 passengers per hour to the rail on this schedule, where they're going to arrive at the train station 5 minutes before each departure time, and then vice versa. When trains are arriving and dropping people off, they're going to leave the train station. So designing it with that level of precision allows you to get the most out of your resources and ensures multimodal connection seamlessly. And so it's the transit planning that goes together with that. I don't want to get ahead of what we're doing with Concord, but we're actually working with their team right now on some of the service planning aspects. So we'll definitely be hopefully putting out a case study at some point, sharing some of the success, but we're happy to have that partnership. So that planning is happening right now.
That's great. You introduced me to a new lexicon, time stamping. I hadn't heard that before. And so I love how that captures that alignment of schedules. It's a great turn of phrase. So, Joe, I really appreciated what you said about North Carolina being a leader in the autonomous space. We are really proud of that.
Where my bread is buttered.
I'll get you that $20 later. And of course, we're working on a partnership that we're developing. Can you give us advice? How do we remain at the cutting edge? How do we keep ensuring that we stay on your list of top states?
I would say three things: community engagement, and community engagement. And what do I mean by that? As these platforms are being tested and proven out in these various use cases, this isn't about just the technology. It's about providing meaningful mobility solutions. So how do you engage the communities where you're deploying these platforms so they have a role in the types of services that you're providing? Let's not assume that getting from here to there is what a majority of the community wants. So I think how you reach out, both from an educational perspective to familiarize people with the technology and the services and how to use it and how to leverage it and what the future holds. But it's also about getting their input into, what would you like to see? What would really enable you to connect yourself to whatever it is you're seeking, a jobs corridor, particular goods or services in a community. But it goes beyond just the individual citizens or constituents. One of the things that we've kind of pioneered that's been incredibly valuable is engaging the first responders as part of our training and launch programs. So having formal training sessions with police, fire, and rescue so that they're familiar with the technologies. It becomes part of the fabric of the community or city or municipality that we're deploying in, so that they've got a level of ownership and understanding of what to do if an incident does occur. So I think that aspect of just continual education, I look at some of, one community in particular, we've been operating for 3.5 years, pre-COVID, through COVID, and now today, and ridership has actually exceeded pre-COVID levels. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact that it's not just a novelty of, hey, I went and rode the autonomous shuttle, check that box. It's really, how do I utilize this as a different way of moving myself around a community and leaving your personal transportation at home and leveraging a platform such as one of these autonomous shuttles. So I think that engagement, Julie, I'd say is probably what's most critical to success.
That's really good advice. I'm looking for Ryan, who's got to be out here somewhere. Where are you? There's Ryan. I think it's resonating with Ryan right now. He said, okay, our first shuttle deployment at the Wright brothers was great, but it was not connected to anything else. And so he said, we don't want a novelty. We want it to be a part of actually people doing the transportation they need to do. So through that community engagement, where do people need to go and how do we weave this into that? I think that's really good advice. All right. So Jennifer, there's a lot of communities in this audience that want passenger rail in their community. We got folks from Western North Carolina who want to see it, from Salisbury to Asheville. We've got cities out east that want to see it, from Raleigh to Wilmington. I see a lot of smiling faces. What advice do you have for them for how to take those from ideas to projects?
Sure. So first of all, I would say work with your state Department of Transportation, definitely. But at the FRA level, we have a new program called our Corridor ID program, and we're encouraging everybody to submit. It's actually very wide open types of eligibility of public agencies. It can be local, it can be state, it can be tribal, regional agencies can submit. And really what we're doing is once you're in that program, you can then be on the map, if you would, for future types of investment and eligible for some of our future funding programs. What I know I saw in Virginia was that we were trying to find new and innovative ways to work with the host railroads. In our case in Virginia, that was CSX and Norfolk Southern, along with some short lines as well, which I think is pretty similar to the case here too. And looking at new and innovative types of arrangements, whenever you do want to have passenger rail on a host railroad, unfortunately, you can't just call them up and add it. You have to, or just tell Amtrak to start service there. You have to negotiate with the railroad. And essentially what you're purchasing is capacity from that system in order to be able to have either new service or even to add stations on an existing line. Being able to package things together is something that a state level can do. So even if a community may not have a lot of bargaining power with a Class 1 railroad, being able to work with a state DOT that may have multiple touch points with those host railroads is another way to look at it as well. And so we see a lot of things. Pennsylvania actually is doing some cool stuff with a new deal they had with Norfolk Southern, and we're seeing some other innovative types of partnerships as well, where rather than paying for capital capacity, they're paying for operating payments. So there's a lot of good examples out there. Again, work with your state DOT and get in our corridor ID program.
That's great advice. And I'm sure Jennifer knows we've submitted a number of corridors for the corridor ID program. So yes, most definitely good advice. So update on the poll for those who have done it. You can see that people do not think the introduction of air taxis will be the biggest multimodal change in the near future, which, Bobby, is probably fair, right? Probably not in the near future, but we are planning for that further future. We do see in the lead the expansion of microtransit, with a close second at the expansion of passenger rail, and third, introduction of autonomous shared mobility. So I got to ask, what do y'all think as you see the future coming? Do you think that's accurate? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say so. It's, having come from a background in public transportation, in addition to rail, we saw a lot of really cool, innovative practices that are coming. So I'm really excited to hear what you all are doing, and also some of the innovations here in North Carolina.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, it is about multimodality. This isn't solving in one segment of transportation. So microtransit, I would argue, is, you could almost weave us into that. So
Yep.
that would give us a first and a third. But it is important that we embrace the need to kind of address this more holistically with all the technologies and advancements. So
I think the key term here is transit as a multimodal network. So to solve the needs of the riders, you need an ecosystem of different modalities, and they all need to work seamlessly. I think the poll is fun, which one's higher, but ultimately one community may need more microtransit, another community may need more rail, depending on their individual needs. The key is to solve the end user's transportation problem by deploying the appropriate amount of each and making them work seamlessly. So obviously I'm excited about the microtransit lead, but I think it's all about the ecosystem.
Danielle?
Yeah, I think I said earlier, it's not a one size fits all solution. And I think that makes it harder, but at the same time, it's more exciting. And it's harder because, you really need a champion to be able to get that in your community. And so unless you don't have that champion, I think it's just, it becomes all, the same thing again and again, right? I think microtransit has a place. I get concerned sometimes because, everyone I want to do microtransit, but, is it going to cost more? Is it going to cost less? Do you need more workforce to be able to deliver it? I mean, are people in all of these communities, does the technology work for everyone? Or do you have to have something else for, my mother would never call a bus. First of all, she'd never call a bus. Second of all, she would never use a computer to call a bus or an app or her phone or anything like that. And so, you'd have to have something that everyone can use, or that you have an alternative.
No, well said. And really, it feels like you all said it so well. It's the multimodal network. It's what's the problem? We always try and start with this, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then which is the solution. So it's really, really well said. Well, I want to open it up to the audience and hear your questions. We don't have any mics on the floor, but we're in a small enough room. We think y'all can stand up and ask away. Oh, or we can walk a mic back to you if you're not as loud as I am.
Apologies for the hoarse voice. So, Prem and Danielle, you mentioned the opportunities that on-demand gives riders and the opportunity to team up with local companies to establish service. Like many others, our agency is currently experiencing staffing shortages. How can on-demand help us address this issue, and where do you see this effort going?
Maybe I'll address the staffing side of it first. The newer generation of on-demand transit technologies, they reduce the reliance on a dispatcher. I mean, ultimately, we still need a person there to provide the alternatives and for people that cannot use an app. But what we've seen, for example, in the paratransit and rural communities that used to be dial-a-ride deployed, is we've seen about within a few months, I'd say about 30 to 40% of riders switch to using an app. And at the end of the year, it gets to about 60%. And I don't think it's going to be 100% in anytime in the near future, but it's not a black and white where everyone's on the app or everyone's on the phone. So to address your staffing shortages question, if a community deploys on-demand transit, or even say a paratransit operation goes to a modern paratransit solution, if say 30 to 40% at least of riders switch to using an app, self-service, without needing the person to manually schedule things, that immediately reduces the burden and the need for a dispatcher to manually insert a trip and provide confirmation and all the follow-up that happens. So that automation is weaved all the way through the solution from the rider side to the dispatcher side. So that actually allows the agency to deploy and also see some immediate relief on the staffing needs. And then the first one is you asked about employers. So that is of all the different use cases, it's a very rapidly it's a use case that's getting a lot of interest, and we're seeing it being adopted. It's small right now, but it's the fastest, I think, adoption and interest. And there's one interesting example I'd like to give. I alluded to it in my presentation. And so this agency, San Antonio, Via Metro San Antonio, they have an innovative partnership with the automotive manufacturing plant, and the private company. I don't know the intricacies of it, but they're actually providing some funding to support this, provided they can align the transit schedules, the on-demand transit vehicle schedules, with their shifts. So their workers could show up to work on time. When they finish their shift, they get picked up and taken back on time. And on-demand enables this. So this is not only enabling mobility for workers and making it easier for employers to set up shop and access talent, but also bring in new funding to the agency that is very novel and different from what historically has been done. So hopefully that gives a bit more context.
On the transit driver side, I'm not sure that we know the answer yet. I think that, if you have requirements that require you to have a CDL to drive transit, and potentially you open up a pool of workers that you might not have to have a CDL that you could train. But I know my transit agencies, like Sheetz, is paying $2, $3, $4 an hour more than they are for their drivers. And, that's hard work. I mean, you have to be an expert in customer service, EMT sometimes. You have to be able to tie down wheelchairs. So it's hard work. And, I applaud any of, all of the folks that deliver that service every day, because it's not something I could do. But I do think that, potentially you could relax some of the CDL requirements. But I don't know that that's the answer. And again, if it gets really successful, you're still going to need the same number of drivers, because you've got to have all those zones and be able to deliver the service that you want to deliver. If you've got 5 passengers an hour, and at some point it's no longer efficient, you got to add another vehicle, which requires another driver.
Yep. Those are great points. Another question? Bridget's got the mic. All right.
Thank you. I'm curious about perspective from other states. Being North Carolina born and bred, what are your biggest challenges in the rural areas in your states for mobility, and how have you worked to address those?
I can start and say it's probably the same ones that you have here. The fact that there's just not enough density to, deliver efficient public transportation. So then you're left with, well, what else? And then I always ask the question, is it the responsibility of public transportation to deliver that? Like, is it really public transportation? I have a transit agency who's constantly saying it's not a public transportation problem. It's a land use problem. And so, I think we struggle with that every day. Like what is our role and responsibility? And years ago, we had a secretary who wrote an article and said, it'd be better to just buy everybody a car for what we're spending on this one, whatever service it was. I think it was some kind of rail service at the time. And it just didn't drive the passengers that it made sense to fund it. And so, I think we still struggle with that.
I'm going to slam the first two questions together and give kind of a perspective from my seat in the stands. One is, and this is a bit of a double-edged sword. You don't want to talk about eliminating, bus driver roles and things of that nature. First and foremost, the types of use cases that we've talked about here are incremental. Typically, they're not displacing a bus service or a bus route. They're typically incremental, extended arterial route type services. But the reality of it is, with automation, with autonomy, ultimately we'll have, and we've developed already and deployed remote command and control centers. You still have to interface with passengers in the case of an emergency. You still have to monitor, oversee, and interact with the vehicles in certain circumstances. That's for the foreseeable future, I'd say for the next decade at least. And it's a lot more efficient to do that remotely in centralized areas than it is to have somebody on every vehicle. So the labor question and the jobs question, I think, is one that absolutely will be, impacted by the future of autonomy. And I would, kind of parlay that into the discussion about the rural areas as well. The ability to deploy affordable, convenient services out in these rural areas is going to become much more enabled by these technologies than it is today. And it's easier to do that in a nice, big, concentrated urban area. How do you ultimately do that in some of these rural areas? And that's where on-demand comes into play, right? It's not about the old-fashioned way of just having certain routes and certain timetables. It's doing the demand planning so you know where you have to provide a service at a given point in time, be that time of day, day of week type scenarios, and create a much more convenient means of having transportation where people need it, not just trying to cover a broad brush area, in a larger rural area in that example.
That's great advice. Any other audience questions? Iona's got one.
Thanks. And you might have just kind of touched on this, but I think we all kind of understand that until the transit experience is a dignified experience. So I'm curious about the last mile interaction and the investment that it takes to make your experience waiting for a bus or a trip. And so maybe on demand is the way that we get around that huge expense of making those facilities, getting them on the ground and in place. But curious how you all think about that last mile and really making it so that if we're sitting there, we could imagine ourselves standing at that bus stop because it's a nice, safe place. It's not a sign and a ditch, which is the case for a lot of our transit stops still here in North Carolina.
I think this thing's going on and off. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Feels like it's coming in and out. But that's a really great point. And I think one of the things that we focus on as a company is the technology around the rider experience. Because fast forward a few years, we've got autonomous shuttles riding around. If people don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they've got a person of authority, at least monitoring the situation, if they don't have the tools inside the vehicle to understand and communicate with them as a normal driver would in those scenarios. The user interface within the vehicles is something we've developed and launched a couple of weeks ago at CES. That's going to be absolutely critical to making people feel comfortable, safe, and ultimately getting, breaking down some of the barriers that are the stereotypes of public transportation, to your point. And that's got to be an important piece of this. Just launching the vehicles and the technology is not enough. And so I think you raise a really compelling point, and that's part of the thing that we're focused on as a business is the service side of this. It's just not the technology in the vehicle. It's how do we deliver these meaningful, safe, available, and convenient type services with the technology.
Good question.
Yeah, I think on the passenger rail side, it's a little bit different in terms of the scale of the issue than with what you see as more fixed route public transportation. But there's some really cool innovations out there. I don't know if any of you have ridden the Brightline system down in Florida. They are really trying to transform themselves and their system into more of a mobility company. And so they're offering opportunities where you can book through tickets. I think they're partnering with Lyft to be able to book a through ticket that would include your first mile and last mile of service, as well as your rail ticket too. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I think we still have a long way to go on the Amtrak side with that, but I do hope that we'll see some more opportunities with technology, like some of the ones we've seen described up here today too, to add that to passenger rail.
Those are great points. Joe, I've got a question for you. I've been thinking about, you made a comment about NHTSA's rules and how we update our rules to reflect where autonomous vehicles are going. When we launched our first shuttle, it was really interesting because the North Carolina laws, when our DMV came to inspect, said they had to find a steering wheel and they had to find a side mirror. And that was sort of challenging, right? Because the vehicle didn't have those because it didn't need those. And what it wasn't checking was all that technology that was driving it, which was, the more risky part. Give us some advice as a state, because you never know what the future is going to be, right? We have a tendency to define vehicles, but we don't know what they're going to look like in the future. What would your advice be to us on what our laws should look like?
Yeah, it's a great point, Julie. I think, one is you hate to throw out the word standards, but we need standards. You think about, the way I simplify what the feds do, they govern the vehicle. Do you meet these requirements? And typically at the state level, it's more focused on the driver themselves. How do you license somebody? How do they pass the test and know they're safe to get out on the roadways? It was interesting learning North Carolina's got some vehicle specific standards as well. But think about the eye test. Today you can throw an autonomous platform on any vehicle that passes FMVSS code. Why does everybody test these in regular passenger vehicles? Because you can do it. You can't do without specific waivers and approvals from the government what we do, which is an autonomous purpose-built shuttle or platform. But the reality of it is you think about the LiDAR or the cameras that are the eyes of the vehicle. They're the perception layer that's looking at what's out there in front of them. Then ultimately the compute layer says, oh, we've got an obstacle. Do I slow? Do I stop? What reaction do I have to this? Well, the states are going to have to think about, is there going to be a standard for the fidelity of the LiDAR or the camera, right? I mean, if one size does not fit all, if you have one that can see out 300 yards, it's going to be much more powerful than one could see out 10 yards. Yet there really aren't any kind of standards being developed by SAE or others to follow. But those are the types of things that are really going to have to be considered and thought about as it relates to safety in the states, that ultimately it's going to be the state's responsibility to govern and not the feds. So a lot of interesting challenges in front of us.
Great ideas, great thoughts. Any other questions? Oh, yep, we got one in the back. Got to make sure our mics are working. Yep.
Thank you for bringing up Brightline and mobility as a service and the whole ecosystem concept. We haven't talked yet about active and micro mobility and how that sort of fits into the ecosystem. Already in the suburbs, even in North Carolina, micro mobility is sort of first to market, right? With EV, people walking, people biking to fixed route transit, people using personal electric scooters and bikes to get to fixed route. So how do you all, the service providers, see your services not being sort of displacing that, but making them better, and having micro mobility and active transportation making your service is better rather than competing with each other?
From Rideco's perspective, there's two aspects of that. One is the typical rider that takes microtransit. The average trip distance is, I think, like 3 miles or more. So it's usually not the same kind of distance for walking. Maybe it's some overlap. And then the other aspect of it is we integrate with multimodal planning tools out there. So we have an integration with Transit app. We have another integration that we're doing with GoPass. So these are all different multimodal apps that can bring in micromobility and other forms to help with for planning that involves more of these modes. So we have these active partnerships. We integrate with them, make it easier to weave in these additional modes. So those are the two things I would say to that.
So in Pennsylvania, it's interesting because I think in Pittsburgh they might be legal, but we don't have scooters. They're not allowed. They're not allowed on the sidewalks and they're not allowed on the street. So I think Pittsburgh and Philly might be the only places that really have the scooters. But I think I talked about all the funding I have in transit. Little teeny bit in the bike ped area, right? We have like $2 million a year. Doesn't go very far. We try to incorporate highway projects and the bike ped piece of that to a highway project. But again, there's so much need to fix bridges and fix roadways that they don't want to divert money from the highway or from the highway or the bridge project to add that bike ped piece. So we have tried to identify those projects early on. It's a program, it's kind of gone decades in the making because I started working on it like 15 years ago, but now we call it PennDOT Connects. And it's really linking planning and NEPA early on so that you can get those bike ped projects, you can identify them, and you could potentially find ways to fund them. And then I'm also very generous with my interpretation of what is a transit project. So I try to help fund sidewalks up to a bus shelter, a trail to a bus connection. Whenever we can do that, we try and do that with our transit funds to the extent that we can. But I think the whole idea that it's all interconnected and we're not competing for that, we're trying to make it all work together, goes a long way. But I definitely think we need more funding that goes towards those other kind of active transportation projects.
Well, please join me in thanking our panel today. It's a great conversation. I appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it back over to our board member to close us out.
Thank you, Julie, Jennifer, Joe, Prim, and Danielle for being here with us. It's very insightful, and we all know that things are changing in our state, and the movement of people are critical to our successes in the future. As we wrap up this session, I'd like to take a minute to thank our partner, NC Go, for hosting the 2023 NC Transportation Summit, as well as our sponsors. Make sure you visit the NCDOT Office of Civil Rights Business Development Zone in the exhibit hall for a great networking opportunity. Thank you again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you tonight during the HNTB's vendor reception. Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
Very good. Very impressive.
Thank you.